Hello, welcome to another video in the series on how to use CNC Write. This video will go into the details of the axis settings and feed options. The axis settings in CNC Write are by far the most complex part. Mathematically, there are 216 different ways to configure the three axes. However, if you take into account that each axis can only be used once, and if you limit the plunge axis to X, Y, and Z, the number goes down to 60. Fortunately, most of those 60 are invalid. For engraving on the three standard planes, the options are XYZ, YZX, and ZXY. There may be machines that require axis 1 and 2 to be swapped, adding another three options. When you add the rotary axes, we now get AXZ, AXY, BYX, BYZ, CZX, and CZY. Again, it's possible that there are machines where axis 1 and 2 need to be swapped, giving another 6 possibilities for a total of 18. A lot less than 60, but still a lot. For most machines, the following 3 linear and 3 rotary configurations should be sufficient: XYZ, YZX, ZXY, AXZ, BYZ, and CZX. The only exception I know of is on some Mazak Integrex machines. On the Integrex, if you are engraving on the flat surface on the end of a part with G12.1, then you will be using XCZ. The good news on that is the axis configuration is set for you when you select those modes. If I remember right, the reason those machines have to use the C-axis to engrave on the end of the part is because the Y-axis will not go far enough below 0 to access much more than half of the face. There are probably experienced machinists out there that are familiar enough with the most common machines and can tell me if I'm wrong on my assumptions on which axis combinations are the most likely. I have recently discovered there is another configuration that is valid on certain machines, providing a feature that was not intended when CNC Write was written. Some of you may be able to guess what that is. I will make a bonus video on that later. It is an interesting feature, but I doubt there are many real-world applications. If you think you know what this unintended feature is and mention it in the comments, I will make the bonus video sooner. The first 2 axis sections are labeled Text Plane Axis 1 and 2. Notice the word plane is in quotes. This is because if a rotary axis is selected, the text will be on a curved surface. The default values shown here are what you would use on a basic vertical mill to engrave in the XY plane starting at XY0. Axis 1 is X, start is 0, which is the X value of the justification point of the text. Text angle is the angle of the baseline of the text from this axis, and that is measured counterclockwise. Axis 2 is Y, start is also 0, which is the Y value of the justification point. If I change the text angle to 20 degrees, for example, here is what a line of text might look like. The third section is the plunge axis settings. Axis is Z, down is -0.1, which is the position along that axis the engraving tool moves to when engraving starts. Up is 0.01, which is where the cutter is moved to for rapid moves. So down should be the right depth for the engraving cutter being used, and up should be far enough above the surface to prevent any crashes during rapid moves. In this case, we would be engraving on a surface at Z equals 0. but the surface you engrave on can be at any Z location. You just have to adjust the down and up values to be relative to the surface you are engraving on. Like axis 1 and 2, the plunge axis can be X, Y, Z, A, B, or C. However, I don't have any idea what would happen if a rotary axis were used for the plunge axis. Depending on the configuration of the machine you are using, it may be possible to engrave on any of the three standard planes: XYZ, YZX, or ZXY. In rare cases, the text may come out mirrored. If that happens, there are two ways to fix it. Either swap axis 1 and 2 and subtract 90 degrees from the text angle, or set width ratio to -1. However, if you stick to the 6 axis configurations mentioned earlier, I don't think mirrored text will be an issue. To engrave on a rotary axis, typically axis 1 would be the rotary axis, and axis 2 would be the corresponding linear axis. For example, A and X, B and Y, or C and Z. When using a rotary axis, the corresponding start value will be in degrees, not inches or millimeters. When engraving on a cylindrical surface using a rotary axis, there are two possible options for the plunge axis. Most times, the configuration of the machine will dictate what axis is required, but I suspect there are some machines where you could use either one. The most likely example current users of CNC Write come across is on mill-turn machines, engraving text on C and Z. In this case, the plunge axis could theoretically be X or Y. However, as I understand it, most if not all mill-turn machines can only engrave correctly with X as the plunge axis. When using a rotary axis to engrave on a cylindrical surface, CNC Write needs to know the radius of the cylinder it will be engraving on. Plunge axis down and up values are used to tell CNC Write what that is. So down will be a little less than the radius, and up will be a little larger than the radius of the cylinder. On mill-turn machines, it is my understanding that when doing normal lathe operations, the machine operates in diameter mode, and the X values represent the diameter, not the distance from 0 to the cutter. Recently, I've learned that when it comes to milling operations, some mill-turn machines come out of diameter mode and some don't. If your machine uses diameter mode for mill operations, the text will not look right. By changing the width ratio or height and width ratio, it's possible to make the text look right. However, there is an easier workaround. Set the down and up values to be the actual radius of the cylinder. Then, after the G-code file is created, open it in Notepad. There will be only two different X values in the file, the up and the down value. So all you have to do is run a search and replace for each one and replace the number used for the radius with a number twice that value. Then save the file. If there is enough demand, I will add a diameter mode option to CNC Write. Now for feed options. There are different feed rates for engraving cuts and for plunging. The feed rates entered for engrave feed and plunge feed are linear feed rates that are based on the units your CNC machine is set up to use, typically inches per minute or millimeters per minute. Feed mode can be one of three options: linear, labeled inches per minute / millimeters per minute, degrees per minute, or inverse time feed. For linear, the numbers from engrave and plunge feed are used. For degrees per minute, CNC Write will calculate the degrees per minute using the engrave feed for any move that includes a rotary axis. Moves that include only the linear axis use the engrave feed value without any calculations. If inverse time feed is selected, the inverse time is calculated for every move based on the numbers entered for Engrave and Plunge feed. That brings us to the end of another video. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I will be posting another video later this week that will go into detail on the append modes and settings. If you need to know more before these videos are finished, you can find explanations of the different sections by clicking on different parts of the image on the screenshots page of the website at cncwrite.com. Until next time.